In the vast reaches of space, far beyond the familiar stars of Earth, there was a species known as the Tsarkians. They had traveled across countless galaxies, encountered dozens of civilizations, and battled many enemies. Yet there was one name they always laughed at: humans. The Tsarkians thought of Earth's people as nothing more than a myth, a story passed down through the ages by ancient races. To them, humans were nothing more than legends, creatures of fantasy, not worthy of any real consideration. For centuries, the Tsarkians had believed that humanity had vanished from the universe, leaving only whispers in the wind. The story of humans was almost forgotten, even by those who lived closest to Earth. The idea that such a primitive race could rise to prominence seemed impossible. To the Tsarkians, who had mastered the stars long ago, the thought of an entire species, one that had once been nothing more than a collection of scattered tribes and villages, becoming a threat was laughable. They had all but written humanity off. Earth was a distant, unimportant world, and its people were nothing more than ancient history. But things began to change. Unknown to the Tsarkians, the humans were not extinct. They had endured, hidden from the vast galaxy, continuing to evolve in ways the rest of the universe could never have imagined. They had developed technologies beyond what any alien species had expected, and they had learned the art of war in a way no one in the galaxy had foreseen. The humans had not only survived, they had thrived. It all started with the arrival of a single Tsarkian scout ship, floating silently toward Earth, far away from the core of their empire. The ship moved quietly, almost unnoticed, as it entered the solar system, its sensors scanning the nearby planets. As the scout ship passed through the outer reaches of space, it took little notice of the small blue planet that was Earth. The Tsarkian commanders had no reason to believe there was anything of value on this forgotten world. The ship's mission was simple: collect data on the planet and report back. There was no fear of danger, for they had encountered countless worlds, and none had ever challenged their dominance. It was just another routine mission in the endless expanse of space. But as the scout ship entered the Earth's atmosphere and began to scan the planet's surface, something unusual appeared on their readings. Strange signals, unlike anything the Tsarkians had ever encountered, began to emerge from deep within the Earth. At first, the scout ship's crew was puzzled. They scanned the signals again, assuming it was a mistake or interference, but the signals grew stronger and more intense. The crew of the scout ship couldn't explain it. It wasn't like anything they had seen before. These signals were intricate, coordinated, and very advanced. The crew began to wonder, could these be the remnants of humanity, or was this something entirely new? The Tsarkians weren't ready for the truth they were about to uncover. What they didn't know was that humanity had developed a form of communication, a language of sorts, that could not only survive but adapt to the most extreme environments. Hidden beneath the surface of Earth were immense, secretive systems, complex and powerful technology that had been built in silence over hundreds of years. Humanity had spent years developing this technology, and they were ready to show the galaxy that they were not a myth after all. The scout ship attempted to transmit its findings to its homeworld. The Tsarkian fleet, confident that the humans were no longer a threat, ignored the scout's findings at first. They thought it was simply another piece of fiction, no different from the old stories that had been passed down for generations. But as more scout ships ventured closer to Earth, they began to notice something strange. The signals were no longer just faint whispers. They were growing stronger, becoming clearer, and the messages they carried were unmistakable. Someone, or something, was clearly aware of their presence. With this discovery, the Tsarkians could no longer ignore the possibility that humans were real, and not just legends. They had underestimated them for too long. The once dismissed myth of humanity was becoming a reality, but the Tsarkians weren't sure if that was a good thing. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Earth's surface, humans were preparing. They had been watching, waiting, and now they were ready to reveal their power. For years, humanity had kept their warships hidden. massive, powerful crafts designed to defend their world. They had built these ships not out of a desire for conquest, but as a means of protection, in case their ancient enemies ever returned. The warships were the ultimate weapon, the final line of defense, and now those weapons were preparing to take flight. As the Tsarkian fleet began to approach, the humans could see their ships on their sensors. They knew that this was the moment they had been preparing for. The time for hiding was over. The Tsarkians would soon realize that humanity was not the myth they had assumed it to be. The Tsarkians' belief that Earth was just another forgotten world was about to be shattered. They had no idea what kind of challenge lay ahead. And as the scout ship transmitted its final reports, one thing became certain. Earth was not a forgotten myth. Humanity was real, and they were ready to fight back. The stage was set. The aliens, who had never considered humans a threat, were about to come face to face with the truth. Humanity was far more than they ever thought possible, and the first chapter of the war for Earth's survival had just begun. The scout ship sent its findings back to the Tsarkian fleet, which had been stationed far away in deep space. They had expected to hear little more than routine reports of no real significance. What the Tsarkian commanders didn't expect was the sudden urgency that began to pulse through their communications. The scout ship's messages became increasingly insistent. There was something on Earth, something far beyond what the Tsarkians had ever believed possible. The fleet began to question their assumptions. On the surface of Earth, human scientists had been monitoring the strange activity of the Tsarkian ships. They were aware of the aliens' presence, though they did not yet understand the full extent of the threat. For years, humanity had been working in secret, developing technology that would allow them to defend themselves against any unforeseen danger. What had started as a series of quiet experiments in energy shields and defensive systems had turned into something much more. The humans had not just built weapons for defense. They had created an entire fleet of advanced warships, capable of taking on any force in the galaxy. The Tsarkians were now beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had underestimated. They had come expecting an easy conquest, but instead they were confronted by an intelligence and power that far exceeded their expectations. For the first time in centuries, the Tsarkians found themselves questioning their superiority. Back on Earth, the government and military leadership convened. The aliens had made their presence known, and the time had come to act. The world's leaders knew they could no longer afford to hide in the shadows. The warships that had been prepared in secret were now ready for battle. They were not just designed for defense. They were crafted with the intent of showing the Tsarkians that humanity was not to be underestimated. At the same time, the Tsarkian fleet began to take action. A massive armada was dispatched to Earth, moving quickly through space with advanced technology that should have easily surpassed anything humanity could muster. Their ships were enormous, capable of wiping out entire cities with a single strike. But there was something that Tsarkians didn't know. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for years. The first signs of battle came when the Tsarkian fleet entered Earth's orbit. They were expecting a silent, unsuspecting world below, ready to be subdued without resistance. Instead, they found themselves faced with the sudden appearance of massive human warships, rising from hidden locations on Earth's surface. These ships were unlike anything the Tsarkians had seen before. Sleek and powerful, they seemed to defy all expectations. The Tsarkians had thought humans were still using primitive technology, but these ships were a marvel of engineering, powered by energy sources that far surpassed the Tsarkians' understanding. The humans did not attack immediately. Instead, they made their presence known through subtle signals, a warning that the Tsarkians could not ignore. The humans wanted to make it clear that they were not afraid, and they were not willing to surrender. The first shots fired by the Tsarkians seemed insignificant, like the soft tapping of a drum. But when they struck the human shields, they were met with an unexpected result. The human shields absorbed the energy with ease, leaving the Tsarkians stunned. This was not a primitive species. They had never encountered anything like this before. The Tsarkians tried again, launching a larger attack, hoping to overwhelm the humans. But the human warships had been designed with perfect precision. Each ship moved with incredible agility, dodging the attacks and countering with precision strikes. The Tsarkians began to realize they were not facing a weak civilization. They were up against an enemy who was more than capable of defending itself. The Tsarkian fleet commander, once confident in their victory, now felt a growing sense of doubt. His fleet was becoming disorganized, their attacks ineffective against the powerful human technology. The humans were holding their ground, and each passing moment seemed to tilt the balance in their favor. The commander sent out a call for reinforcements, but deep down, he knew that this wasn't going to be as easy as they had hoped. As the battle raged on, the humans continued to push back the Tsarkian fleet. The warships, with their advanced weaponry and tactical brilliance, cut through the alien ships with surprising ease. It became clear that the Tsarkians were not just fighting a civilization. They were fighting a force that had learned from their mistakes and adapted to survive. Each human ship was a testament to human ingenuity, and the Tsarkians were beginning to understand that they had gravely underestimated the people of Earth. The Tsarkians had expected a quick victory, but instead, they found themselves on the defensive. For the first time in their history, they were facing a species that refused to back down. As the battle continued, the humans were not just defending. They were making a statement. They were telling the Tsarkians, and anyone else who might be watching, that humanity would not be so easily dismissed. The myth of Earth's people had been shattered, and in its place stood a new reality. Humanity was far more than a legend. The Tsarkian fleet, now disorganized and shaken, had underestimated the human resolve. Their ships, once confident in their dominance, now hesitated as they faced the unexpected might of Earth's defense. The humans' warships, rising from hidden locations on the surface and from orbit, seemed to appear out of nowhere, each one a symbol of humanity's strength. The Tsarkians had thought they could conquer without a fight, but now they were learning a hard truth. Humans were not as defenseless as they had believed. The human warships weren't just advanced in terms of technology. They were equipped with systems designed specifically for versatility and adaptability. Each ship moved with precision and grace, making it difficult for the Tsarkians to anticipate their next move. The humans had learned to use the terrain of their planet to their advantage. They had developed cloaking systems and defensive shields that rendered most of the Tsarkian weapons ineffective. The aliens, once so sure of their superiority, found themselves baffled and on the defensive. The first human counterattacks were measured, not reckless. The warships didn't rush into battle with the hope of overwhelming the invaders with force. Instead, they used strategy, an intelligence that had long been a hallmark of human warfare. The Tsarkians were used to straightforward confrontations, where their firepower alone was enough to secure victory. But they hadn't anticipated the human ability to think outside the box. Each human ship had been meticulously designed for both offense and defense, and the crew members were not only highly trained but possessed an innate sense of adaptability that made them unpredictable in battle. The Tsarkian fleet found itself unable to strike with the same efficiency they had planned. Every time they thought they had a target locked, the human ships would change course, using the gravitational pull of the planets to slingshot around their attackers or drop below their weapons range. The Tsarkians couldn't keep up with the speed or agility of their opponents. It was as if Earth's warships were dancing through space, always one step ahead, and the Tsarkians could do nothing but watch as their ships were outmaneuvered time and time again. Behind the scenes, human commanders worked with precision. They issued orders calmly, making use of advanced communication networks that connected warships together in real time. This unity, this collective intelligence, gave the humans an edge the Tsarkians had never experienced. The Tsarkian fleet operated in a more traditional hierarchical fashion, with centralized control, and that meant they struggled with coordination as the humans' decentralized approach to war began to wear them down. The humans' tactics were also aided by the advanced energy systems they had developed. Each human warship was powered by energy sources that seemed almost impossible to the Tsarkians: clean, efficient, and incredibly powerful. The Tsarkians tried to scan these new technologies, but they were met with confusion. The energy shields that protected the human ships were like nothing the Tsarkians had seen before. When the aliens launched their most powerful weapons, expecting to cripple human defenses, they were stunned to find their attacks absorbed harmlessly, as if the shields were made of some impenetrable force that bent the laws of nature. As the battle continued, the Tsarkians began to feel the weight of their earlier arrogance. They had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, assuming that humanity was nothing more than a myth or a primitive species. But as the warships of Earth continued to outmaneuver them, the truth became undeniable. Humanity was not the weak species they had assumed. One by one, the alien ships began to falter. The Tsarkians had relied too heavily on their technology and their sheer numbers, but they hadn't accounted for humanity's ingenuity. Every time they thought they had an advantage, the humans adapted and turned the situation to their favor. The aliens tried to call for reinforcements, but deep down, they knew that they were not prepared for what they were facing. The humans were not just defending themselves. They were showing the Tsarkians that Earth was no longer a forgotten, insignificant planet. The idea that humanity was a myth was falling apart with every passing moment. Earth's inhabitants were proving that they were not just survivors. They were warriors, willing to stand their ground and protect their world at all costs. The Tsarkians, for the first time in their long history, were beginning to understand that they had miscalculated. The myth of humanity had become a reality, and it was a reality they weren't prepared to face. The Tsarkians had underestimated the humans' ability to fight back. They had thought they could subdue the planet easily, but now they were beginning to question everything they had known. The battle was far from over, but the aliens were starting to realize that this would not be a quick victory. The humans' warships were not backing down, and their crews were relentless. Every moment spent in battle only reinforced one truth: humanity was stronger than anyone had imagined, and they would not be so easily conquered. As the Tsarkian fleet struggled to regroup, they knew that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their very place in the galaxy. The myth of humanity had become an undeniable truth, and the Tsarkians had no choice but to face the consequences of their underestimation. The tables had turned, and the warships of Earth were now the ones in control. The tides of the battle had shifted, and the Tsarkians were no longer the confident conquerors they had once been. The alien fleet, once formidable and imposing, now found itself on the defensive. Their strategies, once honed by years of dominance, were beginning to fail in the face of humanity's unexpected brilliance. The Tsarkian commanders, who had once dismissed Earth as a mere speck in the galaxy, were now forced to reconsider their assumptions about humanity's potential. As the battle raged on, the human warships showed no sign of slowing down. Each ship was a marvel of human ingenuity, crafted with precision and intelligence. The Tsarkian fleet, on the other hand, was growing disorganized, their once flawless tactics becoming increasingly ineffective against the relentless countermeasures employed by the humans. The Tsarkians had expected a quick and easy victory, but what they were facing now was an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Humanity was not backing down. Instead, they were standing tall, proving that they had more to offer than anyone had ever believed. On Earth, the human military leadership had remained calm and focused, even as the scale of the alien threat became more apparent. The world's nations had set aside their differences and united in the face of the invasion, pooling their resources and expertise to defend their home. Governments that had once been suspicious of each other were now working in perfect harmony, and the people of Earth were rallying behind their leaders, showing a resolve that had surprised even their military commanders. The Tsarkians had underestimated humanity's unity and spirit. The Earth's warships continued to outmaneuver the alien fleet, using every advantage available. The advanced technology that powered their ships allowed them to react with speed and precision, striking at the heart of the Tsarkian armada with a calculated strategy. The human crews, composed of men and women from all walks of life, worked together seamlessly. They communicated without hesitation, anticipating each other's actions and adapting to the changing circumstances of the battle. It was a testament to the adaptability of humanity, something the Tsarkians had never considered when they had first made contact. The Tsarkians, once certain of their superiority, were now feeling the weight of their mistakes. Their ships had been designed for large-scale assaults, relying on overwhelming firepower and advanced weaponry to break through enemy defenses. However, the human ships weren't designed to be overpowered. They were designed to think, to adapt. The Tsarkians' brute force, once a deciding factor in their victories, was now being systematically neutralized by the intelligence and ingenuity of Earth's warships. In the command centers of the Tsarkian fleet, the mood had shifted from confidence to uncertainty. The commanders were no longer sure of their chances of victory. They had been wrong about humanity. They had underestimated the resourcefulness of a species that had once been considered primitive. Now, as they observed the humans' tactics, the Tsarkian fleet leaders knew that they had made a grave error in judgment. What had seemed like a simple conquest had become a struggle for survival. Back on Earth, humanity's response was growing more organized and strategic. The human leadership had long known that their survival depended not just on having the right weapons, but on using them wisely. The various space agencies and military forces around the world were coordinating their efforts with military precision. The humans were fighting not just for victory, but for their future. Their cities, their families, their entire way of life depended on the outcome of this battle. In space, the human warships continued to press the Tsarkians back, forcing the alien fleet to retreat further into the depths of the solar system. Each move made by the humans was calculated to exploit the weaknesses in the Tsarkian ships, using their knowledge of alien technology and human innovation to turn the tide. The humans' ability to think critically, to adapt to new situations, and to learn from their experiences was proving to be their greatest weapon. The Tsarkians, once the invaders, were now the ones who were being hunted. Their fleet, once a symbol of their power and control, was now a target for the very species they had dismissed as a myth. The humans had shown that they were not just survivors, they were fighters. And as the Tsarkian fleet regrouped and tried to make a final push, they found themselves outmatched, outfought, and outmaneuvered at every turn. The myth of humanity had crumbled, and in its place stood a new truth. Earth was not a helpless planet, and humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The Tsarkians, who had once believed they could conquer the world without resistance, were now realizing that their greatest challenge was not Earth's technology. It was the spirit of its people. The humans would not be defeated. They would not be enslaved. And they would not rest until they had secured their world from the invaders who had dared to challenge them. As the battle entered its final stages, the Tsarkians began to realize that the war they had started might very well end with their defeat. The myth of humanity had been shattered, and the reality of humanity's strength, resilience, and intelligence had taken its place. The Tsarkians' belief that Earth was just a myth had now been replaced with the hard truth that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. And that was a truth that the Tsarkians would have to face, whether they were ready or not. The battle had entered a new phase, one that the Tsarkians were not prepared for. For weeks, they had tried to crush the human resistance, believing that Earth was no match for their power. Yet every time they thought they had gained the upper hand, humanity's warships adapted, countered, and fought back with determination. It was becoming clear that the Tsarkians had underestimated not just the technology of Earth's defenders, but something deeper, the unyielding spirit of the people who inhabited the planet. As the Tsarkians tried to regroup, their leadership struggled to understand the shifting dynamics of the war. The humans, who they had dismissed as primitive and insignificant, had proven themselves to be anything but. The Tsarkian commanders were beginning to realize that their conventional methods of warfare were not enough to overcome the resilience of humanity. Earth's forces had become more than just a military. They had become a unified force of will, a reflection of the collective strength of every individual who stood ready to fight for their home. Meanwhile, on Earth, the tide of public opinion had shifted. What had started as a fearful reaction to the alien invasion had transformed into a movement of unity and defiance. People from every corner of the globe, regardless of their background or nation, had come together to support the war effort. The human spirit was thriving in the face of adversity, and it was becoming increasingly evident that this was not a battle that would end in defeat. The global economy had shifted to support the war, and resources that were once used for consumer goods were now funneled into research and technology that would help in the fight. In the command centers of the human forces, the sense of purpose was stronger than ever. Leaders from every nation worked together, sharing intelligence, technology, and strategy. There was no room for division. Everyone understood that the stakes were too high, that the survival of humanity was at risk, and that the world needed to fight as one. The military leadership was clear in its vision. Humanity would fight not just to repel the invaders, but to ensure that no alien force would ever underestimate them again. The Tsarkians, on the other hand, were scrambling. Their fleet was losing ground, and their command structure was beginning to fray. As much as they tried to regain control of the situation, they were increasingly outmatched. The Tsarkians had assumed that their advanced weapons and superior numbers would guarantee victory. But what they had not factored in was humanity's ability to innovate and adapt, qualities that the humans had displayed at every turn. Every time the Tsarkians thought they had found a solution, humanity's warships seemed to anticipate their next move, turning the tide once again. The humans' ability to think strategically was proving to be their most powerful asset. While the Tsarkians relied on brute force, humanity's commanders had come to understand the importance of intelligence and preparation. Every maneuver was calculated, every tactic designed to exploit the weaknesses of the alien ships. And the humans' knowledge of their own planet, its orbits, its atmosphere, its terrain, had provided them with the advantage they needed. The Tsarkians were fighting in an unfamiliar environment, while the humans knew their world better than anyone. This knowledge, combined with their technological advancements, made humanity a formidable force in the skies. Earth's forces continued to press the Tsarkians back, each move showing the aliens that they had made a critical mistake in their assessment of humanity. What had started as a fight for survival had evolved into a fight for dominance, and now the Tsarkians were finding themselves on the losing side. They had been prepared to conquer a weak and unsuspecting species, but instead they had found themselves in a battle with a species that had learned to use their strength, their knowledge, and their resilience to outwit them at every turn. The Tsarkians began to realize that their initial belief that humanity was nothing more than a myth was a grave error. The human species was not some insignificant race to be crushed and forgotten. They were resilient, inventive, and capable of defying all expectations. The Tsarkians, for the first time, began to question their superiority. How had they misjudged humanity so completely? How had they underestimated the power of a species that had survived so much, only to rise against them in the most unexpected of ways? As Earth's forces tightened their grip, the Tsarkian fleet was forced to retreat even further. It became clear to both sides that this was no longer a simple invasion. It was a war for the future. And in this war, humanity had found its voice. The strength of the human spirit was proving to be the deciding factor in this struggle. With each passing day, the human forces grew stronger, more coordinated, and more determined. They had learned from their mistakes, adapted to the Tsarkians' tactics, and created a response that was as unpredictable as it was effective. The Tsarkians, once so confident in their ability to conquer Earth, now found themselves fighting for their own survival. Their fleet was faltering, their forces stretched thin, and their leadership was crumbling under the weight of their mistakes. The humans, on the other hand, had found not just the will to survive, but the will to triumph. Every victory, no matter how small, was a testament to the strength of humanity's resolve. As the battle continued, it became increasingly clear that the Tsarkians' belief in their own superiority was not just misguided, it was completely false. Humanity, once thought to be a mere myth, had proven itself to be a force capable of turning the tide of war. And now, the Tsarkians were forced to face the reality they had never expected. Earth was no longer a planet to be ignored. It was a planet that had fought back, and in doing so, had earned its place among the stars. As the war between humanity and the Tsarkian invaders entered its final stages, both sides knew that the outcome was drawing closer. What had initially seemed like an impossible battle for Earth's survival was now evolving into a defining moment for both species. The Tsarkians, who had once been so certain of their victory, were now fighting not just for control of Earth, but for their own future. Humanity, on the other hand, had proven that their resilience and resourcefulness were far greater than anyone had ever imagined. Back on Earth, the mood had shifted dramatically. Once paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, the people of the planet had become united in their cause. Nations that had previously been divided by politics and ideology now worked together seamlessly. The collective spirit of humanity was stronger than ever before. It wasn't just the military leaders who were involved. Every person, regardless of their background, played a part in this monumental struggle. Scientists, engineers, and civilians all contributed in ways both big and small to the war effort. The message was clear. Earth was not going to be taken without a fight. Humanity's strength lay in its unity. It had been a key lesson learned in the early days of the conflict when the Tsarkians had begun their assault. What the invaders had failed to grasp was that humans, despite their differences, were capable of coming together when faced with a common enemy. In the face of extinction, they had set aside their quarrels and combined their knowledge, technology, and willpower into an unstoppable force. The Tsarkians, however, were still struggling to understand this new reality. They had long believed that their advanced technology and sheer numbers would be enough to crush the human resistance. After all, they had invaded countless planets before, and each conquest had been swift and decisive. But on Earth, things were different. Humanity's technological advancements were far more sophisticated than the Tsarkians had anticipated, and their ability to adapt quickly in the heat of battle was something that even the Tsarkian commanders found difficult to contend with. Every strategy they attempted seemed to be thwarted by the humans' unpredictability. What had been a simple conquest for the Tsarkians had now become a war of attrition, and it was clear that the aliens were losing ground. As the battle progressed, the Tsarkians found themselves in retreat, their forces scattered and their morale crumbling. The humans, meanwhile, were relentless. They had learned to exploit the weaknesses in the Tsarkian ships, using their superior knowledge of the planet's terrain and resources to gain an edge. Every move the humans made was carefully calculated, every step designed to keep the Tsarkians off balance. The human military was not just fighting with their weapons, they were fighting with their minds. It was this strategic thinking, this ability to stay one step ahead, that had turned the tide in humanity's favor. But it wasn't just military strategy that gave humanity an advantage. It was the unshakable belief in their right to exist. The people of Earth had made it clear that they would not be subjugated. The Tsarkians, who had dismissed humans as insignificant, now had to face the truth. They had underestimated the spirit of a species that had spent centuries overcoming adversity. Humanity's tenacity was their greatest weapon, and it had proven to be more powerful than any technology the Tsarkians possessed. As the Tsarkian fleet continued to withdraw, the humans saw an opportunity to strike the final blow. In the heart of their warships, the human commanders devised a plan that would force the invaders to surrender. It wasn't about annihilating the enemy. It was about showing them that the cost of continued resistance was no longer worth the price. The humans were determined to end the war, to secure peace, and to make it clear that Earth was not a planet to be trifled with. The final stages of the battle were filled with tension. Both sides were aware that the next few moves would decide the fate of the war. For the Tsarkians, it was a desperate attempt to hold on to what they had taken for granted. For humanity, it was the culmination of their struggle for survival. The war had tested their limits, pushed them to the brink. But in the end, it was humanity's refusal to back down that gave them the upper hand. As the Tsarkian fleet finally retreated into the depths of space, The humans stood victorious. They had not only survived the invasion, but they had sent a message to the galaxy that would echo for generations to come. Earth was not to be underestimated. The Tsarkians had come to conquer, but instead, they had learned a lesson that no amount of advanced technology could have taught them. Humanity was not just a myth. It was a force to be reckoned with. On Earth, celebrations erupted as the war came to an end. People from all walks of life came together to honor the fallen, to acknowledge the sacrifices made, and to reflect on the strength that had carried them through the darkest days of their history. It was a victory not just for the military, but for every individual who had contributed to the effort, from the scientists who developed new technologies to the citizens who had worked tirelessly to support the cause. The sense of unity was stronger than ever. In the aftermath, the Tsarkians were left to question everything they had once believed. They had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but they had found something far more challenging. The war had proven that humanity was capable of achieving the impossible when united. It had proven that the spirit of a people, when united in purpose, could overcome even the most daunting of foes. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of an empire and the rise of a new power, one that would no longer be dismissed as a myth. Humanity had proven itself, not just as survivors, but as conquerors of their own fate. And as Earth's warships patrolled the skies, there was no longer any question. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. The final chapter of the conflict was unfolding, and with it, a new era for humanity. As the Tsarkian forces retreated far beyond the solar system, the people of Earth stood on the precipice of a profound transformation. The war had been long and filled with uncertainty, but humanity had proven, against all odds, that they were capable of facing even the most formidable threats. What had once been a fragile planet, teetering on the brink of destruction, was now a beacon of strength, unity, and resilience. In the days following the Tsarkian retreat, Earth's leaders gathered in an unprecedented show of global unity. The world's governments, once divided by borders and ideologies, now worked together in a spirit of cooperation that had never been seen before. The war had changed the very fabric of human society. It had not only united nations, but had also rekindled the belief that humanity could overcome any challenge, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. People from all walks of life, from every corner of the world, had come together to fight for a common cause, and in doing so, they had shown the universe what they were truly capable of. The defeat of the Tsarkians had sparked a wave of reflection across Earth. The people of Earth had looked within themselves, discovering not just their capacity for survival, but their potential for greatness. They had been forced to innovate, to adapt, and to evolve. The war had taught them how to work together in ways they never thought possible, and in doing so, they had created something greater than the sum of their parts. The Earth that had once been vulnerable to attack was now a symbol of defiance, of strength, and of the power of the human spirit. With the Tsarkians gone, humanity faced a new challenge: what to do with their newfound power and influence. The war had made one thing clear: Earth was no longer a target for invaders, but a force to be respected. The people of Earth, however, were not blinded by their victory. They knew that the galaxy was vast, and while they had triumphed over one invader, there would likely be others in the future. They understood that the lessons learned during the war must not be forgotten. The ability to adapt, to think strategically, and to stand united in the face of adversity would be essential as humanity looked toward the stars. The global community turned its focus to rebuilding and advancing. Scientists, engineers, and innovators were celebrated for their contributions, and the world's technological capabilities had grown by leaps and bounds. The research that had been driven by the need to combat the Tsarkians now fueled progress in every field, from energy to medicine, from space exploration to sustainable living. The war had ignited a revolution in human technology, one that would propel Earth into an era of unprecedented prosperity and innovation. Yet even as Earth celebrated its victory, the world's leaders knew that this was only the beginning. They had learned to survive together, to face the challenges of the present, but they were also looking toward the future. Earth's newfound strength would not be enough if it were not backed by wisdom and foresight. The unity that had brought them through the war must now guide them as they prepared for the next chapter of their existence. The leadership of Earth, recognizing the lessons of the war, decided that it was time to establish a lasting framework for peace and cooperation. The planet was now a member of the galactic community, not as a vulnerable world, but as a force to be reckoned with. Representatives from Earth began to reach out to neighboring systems, building alliances and ensuring that Earth's future would be secure. It was not a time of conquest, but of diplomacy and growth. Humanity's strength was no longer defined solely by their military might. It was defined by their ability to create lasting, peaceful relationships with other civilizations. In the years that followed, Earth became a center of knowledge and diplomacy in the galaxy. The lessons learned from the war against the Tsarkians became part of the foundation for a new era of interstellar cooperation. Human-made warships no longer roamed the skies with the sole purpose of defense. Instead, they represented peacekeeping forces, ensuring stability across the galaxy. Earth's scientists and engineers worked side by side with alien species, sharing knowledge and innovations that benefited all. Humanity had learned that strength was not just about winning battles. It was about ensuring peace and prosperity for all. The people of Earth, once isolated on their small planet, now looked to the stars with hope. The galaxy was no longer an unknown, dangerous place. It had become a vast field of possibilities, a place where humanity could contribute, learn, and grow. The legacy of the war against the Tsarkians would not be forgotten, but it would no longer define humanity's place in the universe. That legacy had evolved into something much greater, a testament to humanity's ability to rise above the impossible, to build a future from the ashes of conflict, and to forge a path forward for generations to come. In the quiet moments, as people looked up at the night sky, they no longer saw it as a place of danger or uncertainty. They saw it as a canvas for humanity's future, a future that had been won not through the destruction of an enemy, but through the strength of unity, the power of innovation, and the unwavering belief that humanity, despite all odds, was destined for greatness. The myth of humanity was no longer a story told by others. It was a story lived by every person on Earth, a story that would echo throughout the galaxy for centuries to come.